Israel has yet again killed civilians in Gaza. Now, this is not in reference to the tent strike that happened a couple of days ago. Israel also has bombed a UN school in Gaza. Now, they are saying that there were Hamas soldiers there. Is what they're saying. They're saying, again, these are their words. They are saying that they believe that this was a Hamas command operation and that they actually had targeted a good number of them. I call BS whatever, and I don't care if it was 10 kids, if it was 15 kids, if it was one kid. One child is too many. That's the way that I look at it. Let's get into this clip here about Israel striking the UN school.
After an Israeli strike killed dozens of Gazans sheltering in an UNRWA-run school on Wednesday, Israel maintains that the school in question was a legitimate target.
Our precise strike was based on concrete intelligence from multiple sources. The terrorists inside the school were planning more attacks against Israelis, some of them imminent. We stopped a ticking time bomb.
Adding that some...
So we'll stop it there. But this guy here, first of all, again, how do they know that? How do they know that? They never tell you how they know for certain who is there. Now, if they claim that they have this intelligence, we saw this with the woman that was arguing with Piers Morgan, that they have this intelligence that they are able to tell and to know exactly where Hamas is at that point in time, then why don't they have that same intelligence that can tell them where the civilians are at that point in time, right? So that's why Piers Morgan called her bluff on that, because that was just ridiculous. Now, the State Department is running cover for Israel once again. They alternate between the faces. It can be John Kirby. It can be the guy that people think looks like Sagar. It can also be Matt Miller. In this case, it is Matt Miller. And watch Matt Miller. We're going to pay close attention to the words that he uses, because Matt Miller is still trying to run cover for Israel. At the same time, he's trying to make it seem like we do care about civilian casualties, but he also has a slip up. And I want you to focus on how he puts a lot of attention on the numbers that Israel says they have killed. Listen to this. Matt Miller here from the State Department.
And then can I ask, on this deadly Israeli strike on a school that was housing IDPs in Gaza, what's your response to that?
So we have been in contact with the government of Israel about this strike. They have said to us essentially what they have said publicly, which is that, and this is their claim, that they were targeting 20 to 30 members of Hamas and other militant groups, that they used precision strike to target only one part of the building without hitting areas where civilians were sheltering. At the same time, we've seen the reports on the ground. We've seen the videos from the ground. We've seen the claims that 14 children were killed in this strike. And certainly when you see, if that is accurate, that 14 children were killed, those aren't terrorists. And so...
Pause. Pay attention to what he just did there. So he said, if it is accurate that 14 children were killed. Notice when it's the Palestinian casualties, there's always that if it were accurate, right? But the State Department did not question the numbers on October 7th in reference to Israeli casualties. And those numbers were wrong. If you remember, they said it was 1,400. Notice that number dropped from 1,400 to 1,200. But the State Department didn't question the number of casualties when it applied to people that were Israeli. It's only when it applies to the Palestinians where they have to question whether or not the number is accurate. Pay attention to that.
The government of Israel has said that they're going to release more information about this strike, including the names of those who died in it. We expect them to be fully transparent in making that information public.
Were U.S. weapons used in this strike?
I don't have any update to that. I'd refer to the government of Israel to
And then
that
my last
question.
question, how does this not cross the red line that the president laid out, several weeks ago? This is the second incident in less than 2 weeks where we've seen a pretty large civilian toll on what was supposed to be a precision strike.
So with respect to the policy that the president announced, he was speaking specifically to a large-scale operation in Rafah, and we have not yet seen a large-scale operation conducted in Rafah. That said,
so you see what's happening now, right? So that journalist is asking him about the red line that Joe Biden had, right? The red line that Joe Biden had. Every time this is brought up, he brings it back to, well, Joe Biden was talking about a full scale operation. Let me tell you what he's actually saying under the radar. What they're really telling you, if you read through the lines, is that they are totally fine with Israel killing Palestinian civilians as long as it's not a full scale ground operation. Did anybody else pick up on that? That is essentially what Joe Biden is saying without saying those words. So when Matt Miller, this is the puppet that they use for the State Department, when Matt Miller comes to these press briefings and he tells everybody that, well, this isn't a full scale ground operation, he's not going to add to that statement, so it's okay. But that's exactly what they're telling you, people. As long as Israel has not done a full-scale ground operation, the Biden administration is perfectly fine with Israel killing civilians. I can't be more blunt about it than that, but that is the way that it needs to be said. And every time that you see Joe Biden give a speech, that is just a photo op. That is just for optics. He does not care about the Palestinian people. If he cared about the Palestinian people, he would stop giving the arms to Israel. If he cared about the Palestinian people, he would not be okay with this attack that happened at the UN school, the attack that happened at the Rafah refugee camp, the other attacks that have happened at Rafah refugee camps. He would not be okay with that. You don't say you have a problem with this and you keep giving the enemy the tools that they need for destruction. Got to pay attention to these things.
We have seen strikes that put civilians in danger well before the president said that, and we have made clear to the government of Israel that we expect them to do everything that they can to minimize civilian harm. We've been through this before. It applies in this situation too. It is a difficult situation. If it is true that you have this site where Hamas is hiding inside a school, other militants are hiding inside a school, those individuals are legitimate targets, but at the same time, they're embedded near civilians. Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also have the obligation to minimize civilian harm and take every...
I want you to pay attention to what he just said, because he has a Freudian slip. That's why I put the captions on. We're just going to go back just a little bit. Listen to what he says Israel has a right to do.
Do everything that they can to minimize civilian harm. We've been through this before. It applies in this situation too. It is a difficult situation. If it is true that you have this site where Hamas is hiding inside a school, other militants are hiding inside a school, those individuals are legitimate targets, but at the same time, they're embedded near civilians. Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also...
That's right, Frank. Frank caught it. He said target civilians. I'm surprised no one in the room, in the press briefing, caught that. Or maybe they did and they didn't get a chance to respond. He said Israel has a right to target those civilians. Everybody catch that? Obviously a Freudian slip.
Have the obligation to minimize civilian harm and take every step possible to minimize civilian harm. So that's why we were pressing the government of Israel and the IDF to be completely transparent about what happened here. We want to know the facts as much as anyone.
Have they taken every step possible?
We have seen them take improvements over time, but still, if it bears true that this strike resulted in the death of 14 children, the results aren't where they need to be. So it gets back to this question of intent and results. Even if the intent is what the IDF has said publicly, that they were trying to use a precision strike just to target 20 to 30 militants. If you have seen 14 children die in that strike, that shows that something went wrong. That said, these are all facts that need to be verified, and that's what we want to see happen.
This is a game. This is a game. When he tells you that, well, these are all facts that need to be verified, it's wrong if Israel killed 14. Notice it's always an if. It's always an if. We're waiting for an investigation where they wait for Israel to investigate itself. Because what could go wrong with that? Who tells on themselves? Do police departments tell on themselves when they have internal investigations? Right? Do they tell on themselves? No, I don't think so. So this is a game, ladies and gentlemen. The State Department is here to convince people that Israel has a right to defend itself, and Israel says that they are doing targeted attacks. That being said, they're saying that civilians have been killed. And if that is true, and we'll have to have an independent investigation to verify that, but that is not okay. But Israel has a right to defend itself. This is a game. This is a game. They are giving Israel the green light to kill as many Palestinians as they want to. And all Israel has to do is to continue to say these two things. One, they have a right to defend themselves and they're trying to take out Hamas. And two, they are making targeted strikes. That's all they have to do. Same game every time.
Go ahead, Simon. I'll come to you, Simon.
To follow up on the broader issue of civilian harm, so we had this NSM process that came to an end, and you came to these specific conclusions that didn't lead to any impact on provision of arms to Israel. Now that kind of 90-day process with the NSM is finished, I guess there's an annual NSM requirement for you, but just to sort of be clear, as of now, what kind of are there any timelines you can give on when you're going to be able to make conclusions regarding Israel's conduct? You know, is there a date when all of these, or at least some of the assessments that you've been making since the beginning of the war might be completed and you can actually make a definitive?
There's not a definitive date I can give you standing here today. I can tell you that there are a number of reviews going on of specific incidents, and those continue. As we said, or as the report said, the NSM 20 report that we released, it's often difficult to come to definitive conclusions in the middle of the war where we don't have access to information on the ground. Doesn't mean it's impossible. We look at it, we sort through it, we take all the information that we can and try to use that to make our best judgments, but it does make it difficult. So that said, we have a number of these reviews going on. We want to see them wrapped up as soon as they can, but they're difficult and time consuming. You have to look at facts, and sometimes you have to make legal determinations as well that are informed by those facts, and that's what we continue to do.
It's not that time consuming. It's not that time consuming. This is a way, and I'll be very honest with you guys, this is a way for them to continue to drag this out, which I predicted they've been trying to do for quite some time. They're trying to drag this war out into the election. And why is because one of the things that politicians have been known to run on before during wartime is that, well, you don't want to elect someone else in the office when we're in the middle of a war. Joe Biden has us in how many conflicts right now? You have the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We also have the war in Gaza, right? Now there's conflict between Israel and Lebanon as well. They're going back and forth between Israel and Hezbollah. There's so many things that are happening. So one of the advantages that the Democratic Party, I believe, is going to try to use is that why on earth would you elect someone else to come into office at this point in time when we have this conflict going, this foreign policy issue going right now? That is something that they will use to try to convince voters you need to keep this in Biden's hands. I've seen this happen before. It happened under George W. Bush. That was one of the excuses that the Republican Party used under George W. Bush. Now, I want to fast forward to this piece here for the press briefing.
Sources of information to determine that.
I'm sorry if you covered this before, but I mean, how are you going to know if the listed names that they release is accurate?
So we will. I don't want to prejudge.
I could make up a bunch of names right now. And
it is a good question.
That doesn't necessarily mean that those were actually
So
the people who were killed, or that they were militants.
Yeah, it is a good question.
So we'll get to that in a second. So what he is asking Matt Miller is he's questioning Israel's intentions here. So Israel said that they would release the names of those that were killed to prove to the U.S. government that they actually did kill Hamas fighters. But to the point, the journalist who you can't see that's in the audience, to his point, how do you know that those names are real? So the journalist in the audience said, I can make up a list of names right now, which is very true, which is probably what Israel will do. We trust Israel to come up with the names of the people that they said that they killed to prove that they were only trying to target the Hamas fighters. You don't know if those names are real. They could come up with anything to protect themselves. This is a joke.
Question. We'll wait and see what it is they release, and if they release any information to back that up. It could be that they really, I don't want to speculate to what they could release to back that up, but we will wait and see what it looks like.
All right, but if it turns out that they name these people and they are confirmed to have been militants, and you are able to, or there's some kind of confirmation that they are in fact the ones who were hit, is that enough for you, even if they don't go into any civilian?
So we also want to
whether
see
they're identified
by
the Israelis or not.
It's
clear that there were.
Well, we also want to see the civilian harm and look at what exactly happened and have a full understanding of that. We've seen the initial reports, but we want to fully understand that. And then the Israelis should want to fully understand that too. They have said that they want to minimize civilian harm. We've impressed upon them the importance of that, so they should want to know that information too.
And I apologize.
So he says that the Israelis have said, mainly the IDF said, they want to minimize civilian harm. And we're supposed to believe that. If they wanted to, let's take combat out of it for just a second. If they wanted to minimize civilian harm, why were they blocking humanitarian aid from getting in, feeding those people? If they wanted to minimize civilian casualties, because civilian casualties are not just happening because of combat. There are people that died in Gaza because they starved to death. Not everyone has been hit. So the fact that he could even stand there and say that, knowing damn well that there were video footage showing Israel blocking the food from coming in, or other videos showing them taking the food off the trucks and throwing it away, lighting it on fire. This is why you can't have me in that press briefing room with him, because I would ask that question. How can you stand there and try to convince the American people that they want to minimize civilian casualties when they were blocking the food from getting into the people?
Because maybe I missed this while I ran out, but did they say that they would go into the details on any civilians who were killed?
They have made clear initially that they would release information about it. I don't have the full details about what they would say,
but as far as what you understand, they've said that they will release the names of the militants
and other details. I don't know what those details will include because they haven't done that yet. So, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what Simon was asking about the State Department's own internal assessments after the NSM had concluded. The Secretary said in one of his Hill testimonies a few weeks ago, I think it was Senate Appropriations, he was asked about state's own internal assessments about Israel's actions, and he was also asked if the State Department has the kind of resources that it needs to meet the objective of carrying out its own internal assessments. And the Secretary, sorry if my notes are a little bit rough here, but he had said, it's a very good question, and it's something we're looking at very hard, and that it's something that in order to do it in real time, the answer is probably no, and that it's an incredibly labor-intensive process. Yeah. He indicated that the State Department doesn't have the resources it needs to get this done quickly or efficiently. Can you just clarify if that's the case? Because Simon was asking about when we might get some kind of conclusions on some of these cases.
It is.
So basically, she's saying the State Department, or she was told the State Department doesn't have the resources to actually get this information quickly. They don't have the resources.
Yeah, it is the case that it is difficult to review the sheer number of incidents in real time and provide with definitive answers on all of them in any kind of compressed time frame. It is one of the challenges we face. If you just look at the sheer number of casualties in the war in Gaza and of course the sheer number of civilian casualties, there are a number of specific incidents that we have felt obligated to look at. And certainly we would welcome additional resources that we haven't made an official request to Congress yet. It's something that is the type of thing we go through in our usual budgeting process. But certainly we would welcome more resources to look at these issues.
We'll go ahead and stop it there. But I think you guys see what's happening. Now they're trying to use the excuse that the State Department doesn't have enough resources to get this information quickly. Another excuse for them to continue to drag out this conflict. And I don't buy it. You have a defense budget that's over $860 billion. You guys are throwing billions of dollars to Ukraine. You're giving Israel $3.8 billion a year. And that was before October 7th. And I'm supposed to believe that you don't have enough resources. Sounds like you need to budget differently. That's what that sounds like to me. And again, how can we forget, right? How can we forget the Freudian slip here? You can't leave without this.
They're embedded near civilians. Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also have the obligation to minimize civilian harm and take every step possible to minimize civilian harm. So that's why they're embedded near civilians. Israel has a right to try and target those civilians, but they also have the obligation to minimize civilian harm and take every step possible to minimize civilian harm. So
Israel has a right to target those civilians, he said. Terrible, right? Terrible. That was Matt Miller from the State Department. And you know what I think of when I see Matt? When I see Matt, because he's had protesters outside of his home as well. Not just Antony Blinken. Matt Miller, if you follow Code Pink on Twitter, they have also protested outside of his house. And it looks like, from what I've seen, Matt has a really nice house. So what these puppets do, like Matt Miller and John Kirby and the guy that people think looks like Sagar, I say that the people think because Sagar said on Twitter that guy does not look like him. But these puppets get up on stage at these press briefings. They tell the press a bunch of BS. This script was already probably written before they arrived to the podium. They're already told what to say. All these lies every day. And then they're able to cope with it because at the end of the day, they leave and they go home to their fancy house with their nice car and their fancy lifestyle and their family. Could you imagine being Matt Miller's kid? Could you imagine being John Kirby's kid? Could you imagine if John Kirby was your dad and let's say you were a teenager or you were in college and you knew the truth about the creation of Israel and you knew the truth about what's happened to the Palestinian people? Could you imagine? How would you feel? How would you feel?